everybody. We're going to talk today about women in sumo wrestling, which is a relatively new phenomenon in Japan. Before we start, I'm just going to go through the ground rules and also introduce our speaker. There's only two of us today. Matt Kay is our main speaker, and I'm sitting in Cambridge chairing, and I'll just very briefly introduce Matt. So Matt is a documentary filmmaker. He founded Walks of Life Films in 2011 and has made documentaries about all kinds of subjects all over the world. And the documentaries have also appeared at more than 50 different film festivals. And in fact, we had a chat with him about this yesterday before this meeting, and he just got back from filming something else in the US. So he seems to be traveling a lot, even at a time when most of us aren't. But the focus of his talk today will be the Netflix original documentary that he has made called Little Miss Sumo. And he's also in the process of expanding that into a longer documentary film, which he'll also talk about a little bit later. So on that note, over to you, Matt.
Thank you very much, Jason. Hello, everyone in the Daiwa community. Nice to see you all, and appreciate you making it. As Jason said, I've just got back from Atlanta, so my time zone's a bit funny. It's kind of the middle of the night for me, so you have to excuse me if there's any lags with anything. I'll have to blame it on the internet, like Jason did. So yes, I guess with, as Jason said, in terms of my career, I've been a filmmaker for about 10 years, and Little Miss Sumo I began making about 3 years ago. So I first went to Japan in April 2017, and then from then until I guess the lockdown happened when I stopped going to Japan. That was about 8 or 9 trips, so went quite regularly in quite a quick succession. And so yeah, I thought we can talk a little bit about kind of the filmmaking journey, and then also about women in sumo, how that's changed, and what seems to be on the horizon for female sumo now in Japan. And also, I guess, women around the world, and in terms of rightly so, issues have been more spotlit, particularly after the Me Too movement. And I think similarly now for Black Lives Matter being a time for change and for a spotlight on different issues and civil rights, it seems like there seems to be change on the horizon, and there has been implementing change for women all around the world, in Japan as well, but particularly within the realm of sumo wrestling. So we thought we'd start off with a little poll, which is just 3 kind of quick fire questions. It doesn't, your questions and answers aren't necessarily, we can't tell who answered what, so don't be shy in terms of guessing. So the first one was just about how many countries actually practice sumo. I see everyone answering away. Just give it a couple of more seconds. So yeah, I was quite surprised, I guess, sumo being very traditionally Japanese. It looks like we've got most of the answers in, 70% of you. So yeah, you just pick out of the three choices. How many countries practice sumo? 10 to 20, 20 to 30, or 30 to 40? So yes, when I first went to Japan, that was to a dojo which is exclusively Japanese people, sumo wrestling. I've now been to 3 world championships, and so in the world championships last year, which was held in Japan in Osaka, there was actually 35 countries represented. And so the answer, which 10% of you, 20%, sorry, 10 people can give yourselves a pat on the back. It was, between 30 and 40 countries. And that ranges from Mongolia to Russia to Australia, all the way to countries like Peru and Paraguay, and Brazil had 20 sumo wrestlers there. So countries, some of them obviously more of a connection with Japan, like Brazil, or more of a connection with wrestling, like Russia, but some really kind of interesting countries, which I was quite surprised when I first went to see the variety and the array of different nationalities represented. Okay, so on to the second question. How old is sumo wrestling as a sport? It's quite an inclusive sport, obviously only needing your body and mawashi, which is the loincloth that you wear. And so I think over the years, lots of people tried to help spread it to more countries because of that. Because say with, let's say American football or baseball, there's obviously lots of different equipment you need. But with sumo wrestling, it's just your body and your mawashi. And so that's made it have an increase in popularity. And yes, the majority of you, oh, we're changing slightly. So yes, how old is sumo wrestling? 200 years, 500 years, or 1500 years? And so there's actually a bit of debate within that in terms of there's not a definitive answer, but most people say it is an ancient sport of 1500 years. So the majority of you were correct with that one. And then for the final quickfire question, if we could go to the third one, please. So what percentage of the Japanese population agree that women should be allowed to wrestle? So is it a quarter, a half, or 3/4 of the population? There's been some events when I was actually in Japan in 2018, and that kind of sparked things further. So it became more of a topic of conversation. Some of you may be familiar with it, but it was a mayor who was in the sumo ring giving a speech at the beginning of the tournament, a welcoming speech, and he actually collapsed and started having a stroke. And as he's having a stroke, several people ran into the ring to try and help and assist him, and a few of them were women. 3 female nurses ran in to help give CPR as he was kind of collapsed in the middle of the ring. And the referee actually told the women to leave the ring, even though they were helping kind of potentially saving this man's life, and Maya Izu. And so I think from that, it became much more of a topic and a conversation within the general national discussion, which previously it hadn't been. And so for me, that was interesting, as I'd already been in Japan several times and been making this documentary. And this was maybe my 4th trip in April 2018. And then because of this, it became a national talking point, whereas before there was never any discussion about women entering the ring. And so they did some kind of various polls around that in 2018. And there's actually about half of people, so about 50-50. It was a similar time when in the UK, Brexit was going on. And that was very similar as well, 52-48 with the referendum. And I think that it was similar in Japan in terms of agreeing if women should be allowed to enter the ring or not. And so, yes, that was about half. I think now it's slowly increasing in terms of people becoming more accepting of that. And it's generally younger people that would then, or I guess the more liberal, and then the slightly more kind of traditional conservative would be wanting to preserve the tradition of men just exclusively being able to enter the ring. So about 30% of you got that one right. And Little Miss Sumo, I'm not sure how many people have seen it, but we thought we could start with showing the trailer, which could give a little bit of an introduction in terms of what I was filming there initially, and then we can then discuss things further, going into the tradition of sumo wrestling and then evolving into women's role within the sport. So if we could play the trailer now, please.
今年は世界一狙ってます。そのために一日一日大事に稽古をしていきたい。土俵に上がる段に足かけた時、ここからはもう一人だみたいに思う時はあります。一試合一試合で自分の 100% の力以上のものをどんどん、宗教的な理由で昔から女性は土俵に上がれなくて、女子相撲にはプロがありません。 小学校の1年生の時に相撲を始めて、そこから3年生ぐらいまでは男子相手にしても負け知らずで、男子はプロ行きたいとか比較的簡単に将来と相撲を結びつけて考えることができてて、多分女子は小学校を卒業したら終わったりとか、女子が上がっちゃダメっていうルールは変えてってもいいのかなって思ってます。私たち女子相撲をやってる人がそれぞれに声を上げてジェンダーに対して戦ってくれる人も増えるんじゃないかなと思ってます。
I've forgotten how dramatic the music was for all these Netflix trailers. They always kind of, yeah, really ham up the music. But yes, that's Little Miss Sumo. So that's available on Netflix now, featuring the amazing Hyori Kon Hyori, and we'll speak about her a little bit later. So yes, we could show the first slide, please. So sumo, obviously, as we've just talked about, has kind of a rich history and tradition within Japan. And there's even some, which some of you may know, about the stories of the origins of Japan, saying how it was two gods that were having this first sumo wrestling match, and that was how Japan was formed. And so it's always had a very special place within Japanese society, and also sumo wrestlers as well have had a special place and are regarded very well respected and high regards, often being compared to gods themselves. And so it's been going on for thousands of years, and generally just with men, but it has evolved now to have women. And so I guess initially the reason why women aren't allowed in the ring is because sumo, the dohyo, the ring, is seen as a sacred space. And so there's different things why people believe that sumo wrestling took place initially. Some was to to celebrate the harvest in the springtime and the summer with the crops, either the beginning of the crop season or at the end of it, and that was marked with a sumo match, and that's seen as then a sacred space where you then throw salt in the ring to purify it, and also along with it being a pure space, that involves just having men in the space and believing that women contaminate that sacred space. And so because of that, it was a space that only the referee, who is more like a Shinto priest, and the two wrestlers would then be allowed to compete in. And so, yes, traditionally, obviously, you are naked apart from the mawashi to show that you bear no weapons and that it's just your bodies competing against each other. So it's a very pure form of sport where it's just literally the brute strength and skill, but used just with your bodies and no equipment. And then yes, people obviously came out in their thousands to watch this. And professional wrestling has largely remained the same and hardly changed. So if we go to the next slide, please. The professional wrestling, as many of you will be aware of, is still kind of performed in this way, and is with the two wrestlers and the referee, who is on the far right slide in the middle of the ring there. And there's still lots of history and tradition related to Shintoism, and every year there will be, the wrestlers will visit the temples, and there's varieties of traditions where they would hold babies and do other things in terms of opening things and provide luck for different people or places. And so there's a huge connection with Shintoism and sumo as a sport, and also seeing the wrestlers as a gateway between the two of them. And the whole thing with the stamping of the feet, the shiko, which you'll see at the beginning of the matches, is done traditionally to ward off evil spirits, to also keep the sanctity of the ring. And if we go to the next slide, please. And so female sumo has actually existed in one way or another also for hundreds of years. It's initially it was seen as not a sport, but more kind of a pastime that men would go to see women, and they would either wrestle also naked with just the mawashi, and that was then banned because of the indecency of it. And then it still carried on, but less so in the stadiums and more so just in kind of background bars in different places. And so from that, it then evolved to then women wrestling blind men, which was then also banned. And that was to be seen as, that would be to seen as, I guess, again, not a sport, but more of a pastime, and also kind of the sexual nature of that. But then it then changed to adapt. So some of the middle pictures you see in the column here, where the women have the mawashi, but they also have vests on, it then adapted to be less about the spectacle of seeing these women naked and more about the sport and the concentration of the sport. And because women couldn't wrestle within the ring, within the dohyo, because that was seen as sacred and they weren't allowed, they had to then wrestle in other kind of tatami mats. There you see the second picture from the left at the top, or they would just wrestle in kind of makeshift dohyos. So it wouldn't have the same blessing that the priests would do at the beginning of the sumo season, but it would be still taking part. And if we go to the next slide, please. This evolved to then becoming the amateur sumo, which is what I was filming and what Hyori takes part in. And then nowadays, women in Japan, if they are competing in sumo, it's in amateur sumo. So again, that has much less of a Shinto tradition than professional sumo. There still is some connections. Before you begin a match, you do a chiri chozu, which is to show the gods that you have no weapons and that you are going into the ring in a fair sportsman or sportsperson-like way. And so that one still proceeds and continues to exist within amateur sumo. And so some traditions have kind of carried on and do take place within sumo wrestling in amateur leagues, which is from the professional sumo. And so this amateur sport is when started officially about 20 years ago. For men, it's been around for much longer, but women's first competed there about 20 years ago. And alongside the mawashi, they have this leotard, which they also wear. And so it's much more of a concentration about the sport and far less of a spectacle. And many women compete. In Japan, I think there's about, in terms of over 15 or 16-year-olds, there's about 500 women that compete regularly in tournaments. And then many, as you may have seen in the trailer, many, like Hyori mentioned, compete as children, but after primary school, elementary school, when they go on to high school, lots of girls give it up when boys kind of continue it on, and it's seen as something unladylike. And so I guess when they're hitting puberty, it's something that many women or girls are encouraged to not then do. So in order to carry on that, then those numbers decrease quite dramatically. But this modern sumo wrestling, yeah, so over 30 countries compete yearly, and the current champion, you can see her in the middle column. It says Russia on the back of her. She's called Anna, and she faced Hyori in the final. So she competed and is the reigning champion. Not the year I was filming, but the year after that, she then won, and she's the reigning champion. And so she's from Russia, where they have a very strong sumo team, as well as many Eastern European countries who also have a kind of background in either judo or Greco-Roman wrestling. And so that's translated to sumo alongside Mongolia, who also have a strong sumo team and also a big traditional history of wrestling. And yes, if you go to the next slide, please. So here is Hyori. She, I guess it'd be good to maybe explain a little bit about the journey of meeting Hyori. And so I was always interested in sumo wrestling and used to watch it when I was growing up. It used to be on Channel 4 when when I was a kid. And so I used to watch it on TV. This was the Ozumo, the professional wrestling that I was talking about with the men. And that was, yes, weekly on Channel 4. So I used to watch this, but living with women, I always found it strange how you never saw any women competing. And then, so as I got older, I kind of did some research and then discovered that not only did women not compete, but they're actually banned from professional wrestling, and they would never be able to make a living or earn money in the same way that men would. And in the ways that men are kind of respected and hailed as heroes for being professional wrestlers, women are kind of shunned, and especially in Japan. Hyori's told me that she's found it quite tricky being quite a big woman, and she gets quite a lot of looks for that. And so it's a celebrated thing as a man being a professional wrestler, but as a woman it's kind of shunned. And so I guess for that, it takes even more courage and to face the adversity, to carry on, to try and actually compete and to want to do it, especially not being able to get paid. So I found this combination of this dichotomy, I guess, of it being trickier to wrestle as a woman and also not getting paid in the face of all this adversity, to then carry on and actually want to do it. And so I found that very interesting, and the glass ceiling aspect of it, as there were still women that compete. And I was surprised to find out that Hyori, so she trains 6 days a week, 4 hours a day. So she kind of dedicates her life to this sport, whereas many women, they give up, as I was saying, after elementary school. And then after university, when I was filming with Hyori initially, the majority of women have to give up then, because the men who are good enough would then go on to become professional sumo wrestlers. But because there's no professional outlet for women, and because they can't get paid, that's the time when they would concentrate on work and getting jobs. And so there'd be less of a focus then on the sport, and they would then kind of give it up. And her family, they put quite a lot of pressure on her to do the same. So when I found out about women, that there were many countries where women competed, but especially in Japan, there was hundreds of women that were still wrestling at university level. I found this really interesting, as I think most sports people, when they would be competing, if they were good, they would try and want to become professional. And it was Hyori's passion and her goal to do that, but it wasn't possible in the way that she would have wanted. And so I contacted a few different dojos, sumo dojos, including Ritsumyokan, which is in Kyoto. That's the oldest sumo club which is mixed for men and women. So the sumo stables are the professional Ozumo ones, which are just men. And then there are sumo clubs, which are often connected to universities, which are mixed generally. Some of them are just men as well, but some of them do have women as well. And so Ritsumyokan had been going for over 100 years and was one of the biggest sumo clubs in Japan, and had 4 women. And so Hyori was one of these women. She had just started university at that stage. So she came from Aomori in the north, and was nicknamed as like the countryside girl in the stable, because she had quite a strong accent, which is different from the Kansai dialect that most people had in Kyoto. And so she was already kind of an outsider, which interested me. And then she was also very young, just having started university, coming from the countryside to the city. So there's lots of changes on the horizon. So that was another reason which attracted me to Hyori. And then the final thing was that she had these big ambitions of becoming the world #1. And also she was studying gender studies at university. So she had slightly more of a nuanced perspective of the women's role within Japan and society, but also specifically within sumo. And she wanted to help try and change that. And documentary I always try and do to help shine light on and to give a voice to people who might not necessarily have a voice in a specific arena, this one a literal arena. And so I thought she'd be the best person to be able to give a voice to sumo, and then also to be able to speak on that sorry, I keep on seeing the questions, but I'm not really addressing them. There'll be a whole kind of discussion afterwards, and so I'll look at those in more depth then. And so yes, with Hyori coming from there, and then from meeting her and hearing about her dreams and ambitions, she was quite separate from the other women who said that they just did sumo because they liked it as a sport, whereas Hyori saw her, I guess her kind of participation in sumo as the sport, but then also further than the sport, she wanted to help women and younger girls be able to participate in a level where they could do it on the same level as men and actually compete and earn a living from it, not having to do other things. So if we go to the next slide, please. And so yes, I made the film. This Little Miss Sumo consisted of 2 trips. The first one was visiting, it was over Christmas and New Year, and Christmas, which wasn't a big celebration when I was in Japan. So it's quite a bizarre Christmas for me, spending it with Hyori. It's a great Christmas, but it was during a female sumo training camp. And so on Christmas Day, I was with these 30 female sumo wrestlers in this remote part outside of Osaka. After we were there, I then went with Hyori to Aomori, where she lives. That's the top right picture, and stayed with her family for New Year. And she was training there and also kind of spending time with her family. And so that was kind of a trip outside of competing, more just to get to know Hyori and to see her day-to-day life, her dedication that she had for the sport, and also her ambitions and her goals. I then went back a second time, which was in the summer of, for the film. I went back several times, but the second trip that's featured in the film is in the summer of 2018. And that's when we went to Taiwan, where Hyori was chosen to compete in the World Championships. And so I then filmed her competing there. After those 2 trips, I then went back and made Little Miss Sumo, and it premiered at, as you see in the top left picture, at London Film Festival, which I got Hyori to fly out for, which was her first trip outside of Asia, which she's very excited about, which I was also very excited about, for her to be able to share that moment. And it was sold out in the Empire Cinema, which is the biggest cinema in Europe, and shown alongside other 4 other short films, which was a great experience. And Hyori got a standing ovation. And I think for her, it was really nice to be able to see that people outside of Japan also cared about the issues that she cared about, and kind of respected and admired her, which I don't think before she had quite realized. So we then went to several other film festivals. The film got shortlisted for an Oscar, and so there was like an Oscar campaign for it, where we went to one in New York and a few in LA, also with Hyori. And then the film then launched on Netflix in the end of the year of 2018. And so it's been on Netflix now, coming up for, No, that's not true. It premiered at London Film Festival end of 2018. It launched on Netflix in October 2019. So it's coming up for a year being on Netflix. And it's had a great response, and lots of people have seen it. And since the film has been on Netflix, it's actually helped Hyori and given her a bigger platform to be able to talk about the injustices in sumo wrestling, in terms of the professional sumo wrestling, and how there's not an equivalent for women, and how she's hoping to help create that division, a female division for wrestling, and to have it on an equal playing field as men. And since then, Hyori has been selected as the top 100 influential women from the BBC of 2019, and she's also selected as the Forbes 30 under 30 list for influential people. So she's now has been getting international recognition following people seeing how amazing she is in the film, which is pleasing for me, being able to have that additional platform. And also since the film, Wanpaku Sumo, which was originally just for boys. So children's sumo, when they compete, they're allowed, girls are allowed to also wrestle as children. But then when it goes to the national leagues, so domestically in their own different, the different states within Japan, they can wrestle. But then if it goes outside of the area and you actually win, so Hyori was who actually won the tournament of Almaty so this is when she was 8 years old. She beat the boys and the girls, but because she was a girl, when she beat the boys and the girls, she then wasn't allowed to then go to the national tournament, which then took place in Kokugikan, which that ring is only allowed for men. And so Hyori, being female, then wasn't allowed to compete there. And so many girls who do win their domestic area, local area, they're then not allowed to then advance to compete nationally alongside. But that rule has just now since changed, and so with Wanpaku Sumo, that does allow girls to also compete in the national division. So that's a change for the younger generation, but they still have it as a rule that when now women start their periods, that they wouldn't then be allowed to also compete, and it's seen as the menstrual cycle being the thing now that contaminates that sacred space. And so there's still a lot of work to be done for women to be able to compete in rings like Kokugikan, but it's a great step that for the children, they are now, there's no glass ceiling for the children, and they can compete at the same level as the boys, but unfortunately that doesn't then transcend to when they become adults. Is that the final slide? Or one more slide. And so this is the thing that I mentioned initially, which was the mayor when he collapsed in the ring. And so I was already in Japan at this point, and as I was already making a film about Hyori, it was really interesting to me that this then became a national discussion, and it was also international news being covered in all over the world, from the Washington Post to places in New Zealand and Australia to here in the UK where I am, as well as obviously lots of places in Asia and Americas. And so I think for me, when I was saying initially that I was making a film about female sumo wrestling and then describing the how women aren't actually allowed in the dohyo, many Japanese people didn't actually know that women weren't allowed in the dohyo, and they just didn't put two and two together, that because you just see male sumo wrestlers in Ozumo, they didn't think about the lack of women there and the reason for the lack of women, which became highlighted through this incident where the mayor then collapsed. And following the collapse, when the women ran into the ring, they were actually then told to leave because of that. The Japan Sumo Association since apologized for this, and has retracted that the banishment of women, and said that in cases of emergency, if there was another situation, they wouldn't then banish the women from the ring. So there seems to be small steps being made in terms of how women are seen and when they can enter the ring. So now there's been a slight adjustment to the ruling to say that if there's a life-threatening situation, a woman is allowed to be on the dohyo. But still, it remains the case that women can't compete professionally. They can't go into the ring in normal circumstances as referees or as competitors. And even as you can see, the third right picture at the bottom, that's a woman who's also a mayor, Tomoko Nakagawa. She is the mayor of, the name's gone out of my head, the Takarazuka. So she's the mayor of Takarazuka, and she, when the sumo tournament, similarly when it goes to any place in the city, it's down to the mayor to then give a welcoming speech. And when it came time for her welcoming speech, as you can see at the top picture, the mayor who collapsed in the ring, that's the microphone stand in the middle of the ring. And so he gives the speech from the dohyo inside the ring. But as a female, as she's a mayor, she argues that she should also be allowed to give this welcoming speech from inside the ring, but she's actually limited to be speaking from the side, from that little podium there, that little red box. So she's not actually even allowed to make any contact with the ring at all, because it'd then be believed that she would contaminate the sacred space. And so I then continued the journey after filming Little Miss Sumo, to expand the short film to a feature documentary, which I'm still making at the moment. And that's featuring both the mayor, Tomoko Nakagawa, and still following Hyori and her footsteps as she tries to create change. And so I thought that we would end just by showing a little teaser clip to Suo, it's called, which is featuring these two very brave and amazing women, Tomoko and Hyori. This should be released next.
ママって結構コンプレックスに思ってたんですけど、私の夢は世界一になることで、昔は闘牛みたいって言われました。女子が上がっちゃダメっていうルールは変えてってもいいのかなって思ってます。
彼が亡くなってもう15年して市長になった。その中で初めて人生自分でできる仕事もある。
その時に女性は絶対に土俵の上に登ってはいけないでしょうか。
On April 4th, a mayor in central Japan collapsed of a heart attack in a sumo ring. Female medics rushed in to help him, but that's when things got tricky.
This has resulted in a social dust-up.
But now the debate is about to reach a higher level.
ある意味相撲協会と戦うっていうことでもないけれども諦めないと思ってるんです。男性の市長は土俵の上なのに私は女性であるという理由だけでなぜこの場だけいけないの？
The Japan Sumo Association is facing strong backlash for a controversial ban on women in the ring.
やべ、チリ。我々選手一同日頃鍛えた力と技を十二分に発揮し、
それに対して発言して、いじめ。日本相撲協会が国の女性を受けている政府とは密接な関係があると思います。女性活躍とかどんどん入ってきてるじゃないですかと。女の賃金差別をやめろ。女を今すぐ土俵に上げろ。
女性が土俵に上がるっていうのは伝統を踏みにじることにも。でもそれが許されなければオリンピックスポーツにもなれないと思うんで、相撲が。あまり小さい選手たちの憧れの的になるような選手はいませんでした。前に肩にして、はい。そうだそうだ、強っ。あ、そうな。今日トーナメントだもんね。今日は勝てる。
かつてはここのいる場所も江戸時代までは女人禁制という入れなかった。伝統やからのが少なくともそれを否定するね理由には僕はならないと思う。それは最終的にはなるでしょう。
私は性別なんて関係ないし、一人の相撲中として土俵に立てるっては言ってます。
批判に関しては一石を投じることが役目だと思って全く気にならなかったです。
女子相撲界もそれを動き出す頃かなって思ってます。
小島新合流生
今やらなって言ってくれるから、だから進めるんだと思うね。
Sumo, which we're in the process of raising money for and hoping to be released next year. The Olympics obviously is now delayed until this summer, and so we were going to hopefully have it ready for then when the Olympics is in Japan. In Tokyo, hopefully it will happen in this summer, which seems a little bit uncertain now, but yes, that's what we're working towards.
Great. Matt, thank you so much. That was a really fascinating presentation and great clips. Great. Well, I will in that case wrap it up. I'd encourage anyone who hasn't seen your movie, Matt, to go and see it. And indeed, we're looking forward to the longer version, Suwo, when it comes out. So please, if you let us know when that comes out, we'll do our best to help publicize it through the Daiwa Foundation as well. But for today, thank you very much indeed, Matt, and we'll wind it up there.
Thank you, Jason. Yes, thanks everyone, and glad you enjoyed it, and look forward to seeing the other events.
Right. Bye then.
Bye.